everyone, welcome back to part two. So in the previous recording, I focused on the concept of genre as one important part of writing across the curriculum or WAC pedagogy for assessing students' writing in discipline-specific classrooms. The other piece that I like to focus on in my science communication teaching practice is a concept called rhetorical move. And a rhetorical move, it's very simple. Basically describes a strategy to enhance one's argument. That's sort of the textbook definition. So it could be a phrase like however, to introduce an argument that opposes what we stated in the previous sentence. It could be as complex as a common rhetorical move, let's say in an introduction section of a research manuscript, is to identify to readers the research gap in the existing literature, and using that to then justify why one's own study needs to be done, right? It gives us justification for our work. So again, it can be very specific, syntax-based, a particular term, a particular phrase, or much more complex type of kind of direction that we give our text, that we give our argument. Another way to describe rhetorical move is a pattern or structure found in a text, right? So it could be strategy, which is, again, a strategy would be to use the research gap to introduce, to justify why I'm conducting a particular study or a particular research project. More concrete, it's a pattern or structure found in a text. And I mentioned John Swales here. John Swales is a very well-known writing pedagogy researcher, instructor. I'm forgetting, I think he's by training, I don't know if he's a linguist or an English professor by training, but he has published widely on issues around genre, rhetoric, and so on. And there is some work on the last slide that I'll walk you through when we get there. So keep his name in mind. So rhetorical moves, to give you some examples, there's two resources that I really find extremely useful to share with students, and I encourage you to look at them and share them with your students, and maybe even develop an activity around it. It's something I'm actually doing this very week for my course that starts next week on August 22nd. This one is from the George Washington University. Let me close these other windows just in case. Oh, no, this is not what I wanted. Hold on. There we go. We'll do this again. 1 second. This is from George Washington University, How to Make Key Rhetorical Intellectual Moves in Expert Writing. So you can take a closer look at this later, but you'll see there are, let's take a look at here, attributing sources. According to X, blah, 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 in historians X's view. So there's several sort of phrases that one can use to attribute a source. So they're organized by the type of rhetorical move, by the type of argument, structure I want my reader to, want to present to my reader to present a particular piece of my argument, of my persuasion, right? This is again where I think persuasion plays a role. So take a look at this. I find it very useful, and students really kind of enjoy looking at this. It is based on the work by two professors of English, Graf and Birkenstein. It's mentioned right here, They Say, I Say, which is a textbook that's often used, it's a very small little book, for introductory writing on the undergraduate level. And I think it might actually be underused on the graduate level. So I've used some of their approaches and teachings as well. So if you want to check this one out as an additional resource, I encourage you to do so. The other piece that I really like is from a blog on Writers Community, which is a really fun online graded writers community. I think that's a really great place to look for suggestions on writing. And here is another different, so again, rhetorical moves around understanding rhetorical moves in meta-language, analyzing articles in your field, using key skeletons to claim authority. And a skeleton meaning, I'll show you one that I use in my course for introduction sections. But it also links to this wonderful University of Manchester academic phrase bank. And here you have, so describing quantities. Let me just click on this. So describing fractions. It gives you this breakdown of what are some ways to describe fractions. And so it really, it's a treasure trove of great material for students as they're learning and making this transition from undergraduate to graduate writing and into some really high level writing and research-based writing in their fields as either master's or doctoral students. So in the writing classrooms, I have three main suggestions how, in addition to the focus on genre and rhetorical moves and the rhetorical situation, on how to design a writing classroom. And again, I know for most of you, writing will not be the dominant topic you're teaching like I do, but it does play, I think, a big role in many of your courses, and I think in graduate education in general. So I have found that the Quality Matters framework is helpful, and I mention this here because in the graduate school for online courses, which all my courses are 100% asynchronous, the Quality Matters framework is extremely useful. I do think it helps for designing in-person classes as well, because it forces instructors to focus on learning outcomes that are particularly focused on writing, and then really to think about how does a writing assignment in a class reflect other content-based learning outcomes. If you want more information, you can contact me. I'll get you in touch with folks in our Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm sure many of you are already familiar with writing with Quality Matters if you have taught with in collaboration with our graduate school folks and instructional designers. I also think that the second really important part for writing classrooms in a WAC context for graduate level education is to create room for peer-to-peer feedback. But peer-to-peer feedback needs to be needs close oversight and a lot of over explanation and clear order, effective direction. And I do some peer-to-peer feedback with my students, and I'm very strategic about it. And I give them a lot of time to prepare for it, because it is not as easy, as you all know, to give really effective feedback to other writers. And especially for students who are just starting out, it's a particular challenging thing to do. So there are some tools in place to support you with that. If you have more questions about that, again, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to provide some more examples and some other resources for you, a particular peer-to-peer feedback. And then some practical tips that has worked really well for me when providing feedback on students' work is to download the student papers and use the Word comment function. And this is particularly geared for those of you who might teach online or have online components. I don't like the Blackboard comment function. I think it's much easier for students than to download, to get the Word document with our comment function. I am not a big fan of using track changes in students' work, so I don't do that. I put everything in my comments because I really want to preserve the author's authority over their own text. It's very important that when we provide feedback, don't focusing on like, okay, I'm going to be a grammar and sentence level editor. Research has shown that students don't learn from that. What they learn is but not very much. What they learn is to feel bad about themselves, right? And if there is grammar and sentence levels issues, there's different ways to discuss that. But our job is not to edit it and provide feedback. And I think sometimes we have to divorce ourselves also from our expectations of how to say certain things in a certain way, and have to see where students are coming from. So my suggestion is, and I'm going to spend some time on this, going to some examples, is to make sure you react as a reader and ask questions. If this is the only thing you do for the rest of your life for giving feedback to students on writing in a classroom, it's different when you're working, let's say, with a student on a dissertation. There you might get a little bit more involved. But because there is more at stake and you have a much closer relationship with that student than somebody who's taking your course maybe once or twice. But this idea of reacting as a reader and asking questions and putting our comments in question format, really inviting us and the writer into a conversation around their text, it really can be life-changing in the way that our students will start revising their work, has been my experience. So what does it mean for our teaching, right? So it's really about engaging students in conversation. I already mentioned this. And it's about the genre. This is where genre convention can come in. So I often have faculty tell me like, oh, my students, they're supposed to write this research report and they're using such informal language. Oh, I can't believe they're doing this. So maybe a question to ask is like, I'm noticing you're using some language that some folks might, or some readers might perceive as informal. Have you thought about the kind of genre we're asking to write? Have you seen language like this in some of the research articles you've been reading for the class? What are some other ways you could maybe be able to express it, right? So we're really engaging in a conversation. We're not chastising, we're not correcting, we're providing guidance and direction. And again, bringing genre conventions into this conversation, engaging students in conversations about the common genres in the field profession. So having some assignments leading up to a major research paper, such as where students analyze maybe a sample text, like let's analyze together a typical research paper. What are we noticing? What kinds of phrases are being used here to make certain rhetorical moves? And that can be really quite profound for students who are used to reading research articles for just content. Rightfully so, there's nothing wrong with that. But we often forget that every text that we read is a writing sample. And it's an example of a genre and of genre convention, of rhetorical moves and so on. So there's ways to build that into your classroom as assignments, as discussions. I love using Hypothesis, which is it's available in Blackboard. It's a social annotation tool where students can directly add comments to text, PDF files, or websites. So there'll be some workshops coming out to the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning on Hypothesis, I believe, because we have just subscribed to the service full time at our campus. And in general, the more opportunities you can provide for revision throughout the course with feedback from you and peers, the better your students, or the more chances and opportunities your students will have to really hone their writing skills. And don't expect that if you do this only once or twice, that suddenly somebody who has struggled with writing or putting their ideas correctly on paper will suddenly be Toni Morrison, born out of the ashes of your course. Not the ashes, I'm thinking of a phoenix here. That won't it takes time, but we can get them there, I think, step by step and course by course. So I like to put this idea of genre training and rhetorical moves in the larger context of mentoring for graduate students. Here is a little piece from the Conference on College Composition and Communication, which is the guiding professional group for my field of writing instructors and writing pedagogy. I'm not going to read through this. You can take a look at this, but I really like this first point and the second one about demystifying practice, demystify writing and research. I don't think we do that nearly enough, especially in science-based education, where we don't have enough conversations with our students about what does it mean to write? What's the writing process look like? What is it like to receive reviews from reviewers? Please, awful, right? What does it mean to write an article with 4 other people? Those are important things to integrate in our instruction when we include writing assessment as part of discipline-specific courses. So take a look at this. I'll have the link to it on the bottom here, but I also have it linked in the resource section. To give you, actually, I'm going to stop here because I'm at 13 minutes for the recording, and I'm going to give you a break, and then we'll look at some examples together.